All right, so we are going to set up the quarantine tub for the new jungle carpet python that is coming in, or I guess if you're watching this, I already have it, but this is a couple weeks before I get or I guess a week before I'm supposed to get the animal, so you wanna set up your tub always a couple days beforehand at least, so you can kind of get a feel for temperatures, humidities, and everything else. So we're gonna do that today. I cannot stress enough the importance of setting up a quarantine tub in a separate room from your other animals. I know how tempting it is to add a new animal right directly into your reptile room or next to your other animals. It is super important that you don't do that. There's lots of different diseases and viruses and things that can be transmitted. Even if you trust your breeder and you know your breeder is good and they have a clean site and a clean facility, it's super important that once you get the animal here, you eliminate all other variables and you can allow the animal to adjust and make sure it's healthy before you add it into your room. There's just no reason not to do it. Things like there's viruses, but mites is another big one that it's just not worth it to contaminate your whole collection. And really there's no excuse. I live in a very small, just 2-bedroom apartment. So look at this. This is my closet. I put clothes in here and I'm using this to set up a small little rack for the next couple months just so I can monitor this python in its own environment. This is in a bedroom. I literally only come in here to sleep. So there's no noise, there's not a lot of commotion going on here. I can control the environment a little bit better than my living room, for example, where there's, we're always watching TV and moving around in there. So this is gonna be a much quieter environment for it and I can monitor it and make sure it's healthy. And then we can add it into the room. So let's get started. So the tub I'm going to be using for this little guy is, I'm not sure if you can see that, it's a really useful box. That's the brand, and it's a 9-liter tub. So currently the snake is being kept in a shoebox tub, so that's a little bit smaller than this, and I'm not interested in introducing it to a much larger environment, at least for the next few months. You want to make sure you're not stressing out the animal. This animal is being shipped, so it's going to be stressed out when it gets here. I want to put it in an environment that's very similar to what it is currently at the breeder. The reason I went with the really useful box, or sometimes in the UK they're shortened as RUBS. You'll see that acronym. When people say RUBS, these are the type of box that they mean. Originally I thought that I was just going to be using this as a standalone just on a table itself, which meant I would have needed to keep the lid on. RUBS are great because they are very secure. Like, it's really, really tough to separate this lid. These clamps work very, very well to keep the lid on. So I recommend if you're going to be picking up a tub and you want to be using the lid to keep the animal in, buy this brand. It's a little more expensive than the other ones, but you can definitely have some peace of mind in terms of making sure that these lids can't be popped off by the snake inside. Although now that I didn't realize I was going to be putting it in a shelving unit, so I'm probably not going to be using the lid anyway, but we're going to set this up. So when I'm setting up tubs, you guys have probably seen me do this before. I always use these felt footings to put on underneath for a couple things. One, it gives a little bit of a gap between the tub and the heat mat itself, so that there's a little bit of breathing room. And two, I'm gonna need to suck up some of the space between the top of the tub and the top of the shelf because it doesn't work perfect. Again, I'm using my clothing rack that I store clothes on, so it's not built to be a rack, so I'm gonna have to kind of play with it until things work. So I think I'm actually gonna have to double stack these. Okay, so as I said, this is an IKEA shelving unit. It's not made for snakes, obviously, so I need to make sure I'm retrofitting this in a way that I know the snake is going to be safe in here and also prevent any escapes. So the first thing I'm going to do, fortunately this tub fits basically perfect in here, but first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add this, just a piece of hardboard, just scrap hardboard that I have. Wood would also work, and I'm just going to add it right here just to give the shelf a little bit of a guide. So it's going to provide almost like a rail for the tub, so when I'm pulling it in and out, it will stay in place, and also when it's in there, it'll stay in place. So if that doesn't make sense, it'll make sense in a second. Okay, so now I've added this rail in here, so that's secured. So you can kind of see what I mean by that. So when the tub is in, it can't move side to side. So this is just simple, basically a glorified piece of cardboard, essentially. Just 2 screws holding it in. Now this thing can't move side to side. There's one more thing that I need to do until I'm comfortable with the setup. This shelf below here is loose. It's just sitting on those pegs, and I'm not a huge fan of that because then the shelf is able to move, and if this falls down this way, it'll fall off the felt pads, and boom, it's gonna leave a giant gap at the top. And I'm not happy with that. So I'm gonna secure the shelf in with some screws so that can't happen. So time for a very quick rant. I hope you can bear with me here. I'm not suggesting that a ball or a baby carpet python is going to be able to dislodge this shelf and then somehow make a break for it. I'm not suggesting that at all. When you're setting up your snake, you always have to remember there's two animals you have to deal with. One is the animal that's going into the enclosure, and the second is the animal that has to take care of the snake. And that animal can be pretty dumb sometimes, and that's you and me. I have to assume that I'm going to do some dumb things and make some stupid mistakes. That's just how humans are, right? We make mistakes sometimes. I don't want to have anything in this setup that can mean maybe I'm having a bad day, or if I'm in a rush and I'm doing a quick check, I don't want to have anything that can do this, boom, drop open, or maybe I'm walking by and I bump it and this happens. I need to make sure all of that is completely closed in, that nothing weird can happen, because we all make mistakes. But I take the privilege of owning snakes very seriously, and it's a privilege. It's not a right. You're not awarded this right to care for snakes. It's an absolute privilege to own exotic animals. And I have to remember as an individual that I live in a space with another individual who's not super keen on snakes. She doesn't mind them, but she certainly doesn't want them to escape. And I also live in a community with other people who aren't keen on having snakes escape. And you have to remember that if this is your first snake, you really want to make sure you are doing everything you can to prove to the people you live with and your community that you deserve to care for the snake, and provide really good care, and two, you're making sure that you're not going to have any accidents. Of course, accidents do happen, but super important that you are proving to the people in your life that you actually deserve to own them, and you can care for them properly. So having an animal escape is just really going to add fuel to the fire for maybe your parents, the people you live with, or the people in your community, that we as animal owners shouldn't be allowed to keep snakes. So do your due diligence, make sure you're doing your work. I had a friend buy a ball python last year. If he's watching this, sorry, I'm gonna throw you under the bus here. And I specifically told him the lid that he had with the tub was not going to work. It was not secure enough. Even though it latched in nicely, there was still gonna be an opportunity for the animal to escape. And sure enough, he didn't believe me. He said, this doesn't seem like it's gonna be able to escape. And of course, the ball python escaped on 2 separate occasions. 2 times his girlfriend found it like hiding in the bathroom on top of the mirror or something crazy like that. And that is just a way to start distrust with the people that in your life. Not a lot of people are reptile fans. Of course we are. We have to remember that. Do your job, make sure everything is tight and secure. Rant over. Okay, so I've also added these 2 vinyl strips. This is just leftover scrap flooring that I had from when I did my Brazilian rainbow boa's floor a couple weeks ago. This wasn't necessary, but what it does is it just fills up that gap just a little bit more. So if you see the tub slide in, boom, this is actually a tight gap at the top now. There was about a 4mm gap at the top, which I wasn't totally happy with. Again, this animal probably wasn't going to be able to squeeze through a 3 or 4mm gap. I haven't seen the animal in person, so I can't really have a good idea of how big it is. I wouldn't anticipate it being able to, but I just thought, why not just close the gap up? That way it's nice and tight, and then we'll just drill holes for ventilation. That's just one other way to be a little bit safer. But what I kind of forgot was that I need to add some heat. So I'm gonna add a heat pad back here, and I think it's just gonna have to tuck underneath this tile. So I'm gonna have to peel this up to get the heat on. I'm not going to attach the heat directly to the tub just because I think it'll be a little bit inconvenient, but this will be perfectly fine. And this is just an Exoterra heat pad. This is far too big for the tub that I'm using, so I'm going to be having it over to one side, so really just a portion of the pad is going to be heating the tub. The rest of it's just going to be maybe helping with a little bit of ambient temperature, but it's not going to be directly a hot spot. That way I don't want the entire tub to be heat, obviously. You want to provide that thermal gradient. So the heat pad's going to be sitting about here. Just got to pull up this guy. And obviously we need our thermostat probe, so I'm just going to put that underneath the tub here. Typically I do this a little bit differently. If you watch my Brazilian rainbow boa setup enclosure, when I set my last quarantine tub up, I actually have this fixed right to the tub. But because this is a drawer, I don't want it to be constantly pulling the probe out. So I'm just going to tape it down, and the heat mat will still throw off plenty of heat to get the hot spot that we need. This is just going to be a little bit more convenient for me. So now we're gonna drill some vent holes. So the way you wanna drill vent holes is make sure you go slow. So drill a couple holes and then give it some time to test your humidity. You don't necessarily wanna drill too many holes and then you're gonna have to tape them back up or something and seal them if you're losing too much humidity. Now, if you listened to my videos before, you know I deal with a very fluctuating climate. So right now it's getting into winter. The relative humidity in the apartment is under 20%. In the summer, it's 80%. So right now it's winter, so I'm gonna have to err on the side of drilling less holes. And then in the summer, if I'm still using this tub for him, which I don't think I will be, I'll have to drill some more holes. But the way I always do it is I start with the back end where the heat is gonna be. I know the heat's gonna be in this corner. So I drill a few holes at the top of the hot side, and then I'm gonna drill on the exact kitty corner side on the bottom of the front. That way, as heat rises through the back, it'll vent out the holes through this end and it'll suck and draw cool air from the bottom here. So you're gonna get kind of a nice convection airflow. Obviously very passive, but it's the best way to do it in my opinion. Okay, so now that I have my vent holes drilled, I think I have 3, 6, so I have 12 holes drilled, which might not seem like very much. You have to remember snakes use very, very little oxygen. They're ectotherms. They're not using a lot of energy to keep themselves warm. Obviously, they're cold-blooded. So even this amount of air is gonna be plenty for the snake. Like this is not like it's an airtight seal or anything like that. This would be plenty of ventilation for them. Really the most important thing is making sure that the humidity is in the right spot. So I'm just going, oh, it looks like my battery died in this thing. But anyway, right now I'm just running a test to see where the humidity sits, and then I'll drill more holes if I need. But while I'm waiting for that, I'm gonna add one more safety precaution to make sure that this is in my room, this is part of my closet, so I'm really wanting to make sure that this is gonna be secure. Plus, I have to, this is my girlfriend's bedroom as well, and her instructions were I better not be able to see the snake at all in the bedroom. So I need to make sure that there's no way I'm gonna leave the tub open or anything. So I'm gonna add one of these storm door stoppers, and that's just gonna sit there. That way when I'm done with the tub, I'll just slide this down, and that way it'll stop it from being pulled out by mistake. So just a very quick update. It's been about maybe an hour and a half or 2 hours since I've turned the heat on and put the water in. Things aren't looking super good right now. It's taking a little bit of while to heat up. So on the front end, I have a temperature of around 72 degrees, which is the room temperature of this room. Now that's okay for a jungle carpet. I'm not worried about that. I may have to bump up the actual ambient room temperature in this room because I'm having trouble getting the back end warm. So right now the back end is sitting at about 76. Obviously that's too cold. I'm sure the hot spot's a little bit warmer than that. I haven't checked that yet, but I want to see a higher ambient in there. Now, I do have a fairly large gap underneath this tub, obviously, and that's definitely making it very difficult for the heat mat to work. Heat mats, basically, they do really need to be in contact with the tub. Typically, you have the air gap underneath the heat mat rather than above the heat mat. So one of two things is gonna happen. One, it may take 8, 9 hours for that heat mat to eventually get warm enough and build up enough heat in that air gap to make the ambient temperature inside the tub warmer, which I'm okay with. If it takes a little bit of time, that's totally fine. Or it'll just never happen and that heat mat's just not powerful enough to do it, so I'm gonna have to come up with another solution for how I'm gonna get the heat in contact from the mat to the tub. But that's why you do these things early. I have several days to figure this out. It's definitely something that you would wanna be doing 4 or 5 days before you get the animal, rather than you have the animal sitting in a plastic deli cup while you're trying to mess around with the tub. So again, this is why it is so important to be doing this stuff well in advance before you get the animal, because if you're anything like me, you may have to completely redo it, as I had to do in this case. So as I was saying earlier, I was struggling to hit the proper temperatures inside the tub. So basically what happened is I had too much of an air gap underneath the tub, but between the tub and the heat mat. And the heat mats don't work well to heat air. They really need to be touching something to heat the object that they're in contact with. So I needed to
make that gap smaller. And that double stacked felt as well as the tile that the tub was sitting on top of was just too much air gap between it, so I needed to reduce it to just the thickness of one felt pad. So I removed the tile and removed the double stacked felt, but now I needed to actually bump the shelf's height up higher so there was no giant gap at the top of the tub. So I went with the normal conventional, that CD method that you probably have seen people use before. You're just using the CDs to create a small gap, and that's what you're using for your shelf height. Now, if you're currently asking, why didn't I do this in the first place? I don't have an answer for you. I have no idea why I didn't do this in the first place. It sort of dawned on me after, and I basically now have a bunch of extra screw holes in this thing, but it's okay. It will all work out in the end.
So it's a few days later and I finally have the tub kind of set to where I want it. It took me a couple days to get things balanced. It wasn't really working as well as I had hoped. But anyway, the humidity is exactly where I want it, right around 50%. It hovers between sort of 48 and 55, which is perfect. My front end on the cool side ranges from 76 to 78, and then the back end ambient is around 82 with a warm spot of 85, which is exactly where I want it. I did end up having to put another heat mat on the back of the shelf, so I'll show you how I did that. It's kind of an unconventional way to use the heat mat. Typically you're not ever going to want to use a heat mat to produce ambient temperature, but it did work in this case. Some people might say not to do that, but I don't mind doing it. As long as you have it on a thermostat, it's totally fine. So I do have that running on a thermostat as well, it does come off during the nighttime for just a little bit of a night drop. I used craft paper for substrate. Again, we're kind of keeping this clean and simple because this is a quarantine tub. I want to make sure I can monitor this guy as closely as possible. The craft paper does perfect for that. I did make a hide out of that kind of half cylinder of a drainage pipe, as well as some climbing opportunities for him in there as well. So the tub is perfect and we're ready to go. And of course, this is several days later. You can see my face did get smaller, and the snake is in the tub. So we're gonna finish off this video by taking a look at him, and we're gonna try to give him his first meal. I've had him for about a week now. I do want to give him his first meal. I think it's been over 2 weeks since he's eaten, so I know he's probably hungry, and we're gonna see if we can get him to take one. This guy doesn't know how to eat. I think I'm gonna let him be. I think the lights and the camera are definitely maybe freaking him out a little bit. He's trying to eat it sideways. I'm just gonna put his hide back on, and I'll let you guys know at the end of the video if he does eat it. I'll just kind of put it in the credits there. I think he's gonna eat it, but we're gonna have to give him some patience, or I'm gonna have some patience on my part. I'm used to boas.